Lucy Morgan was an artist. She had spent a week painting in a small country town and decided that the next day she would move on. She would go to the village called Kingston. But that night Lucy Morgan had a strange dream. She dreamed that she was walking up the dark, carved staircase and entered a bedroom. It was an ordinary room except for two things. The carpet was made up of large squares that looked like trapdoors, and each of the windows was fastened shut with big nails that stuck up of the wood. In her dreams, Lucy Morgan went to sleep in that bedroom. During the night, a woman with a pale face and black eyes and long black hair came into the room. She leaned over the bed and whispered, "This is an evil place. Flee while you can." When the woman touched her arm to hurry her along, Lucy Morgan awakened from her dream with jerk. She lay awake the rest of the night trembling. In the morning, she told her landlady that she had decided not to go to Kingston after all. "I can't tell you why," she said, "but I just can't bring myself to go there." "Then why don't you go to Dorset?" the landlady said. "It's a pretty town and isn't too far." So Lucy Morgan went to Dorset. Someone told her she could find a room in a house at the top of the hill. It was a pleasant-looking house, and the landlady there, a plump, motherly woman, was as nice as could be. "Let's look at the room," she said. "I think you will like it." They walked up dark, carved staircase like the one in Lucy's dream. In these old houses, the staircases are all the same, Lucy thought. But when the landlady opened the door to the bedroom, it was the room in her dream, with the same carpet that looked like trapdoors, and the same window fastened with the big nails. "This is just coincidence," Lucy told herself. "How do you like it?" the landlady asked. "I am not sure," she said. "Well, take your time," the landlady said. "I'll bring up some tea while you think about it." Lucy sat on the bed staring at the trapdoors and the big nails. Soon there was a knock on the door. "It's the landlady with tea," she thought. But it wasn't the landlady. It was the woman with the pale face and the black eyes and the long black hair. Lucy Morgan grabbed her things and fled. Sam's new pet. Sam stayed with his grandmother when his parents went to Mexico for their vacation. "We are going to bring you back something nice," his mother told him. "It will be a surprise." Before they came home, Sam's parents looked for something Sam would like. All they could find was a beautiful sombrero. It cost too much, but that afternoon, while they were eating their lunch in the park, they decided to buy the sombrero after all. Sam's father threw what was left of their sandwich to some stray dog, and they walked back to the marketplace. One of the animals followed them. It was a small gray creature with a short hair, short legs, and long tail. Wherever they went, it went. "Isn't he cute?" Sam's mother said. "He must be one of those Mexican hairless dogs. Sam would love him." "He'll probably somebody's pet," some father said. They asked several people if they knew who its owner were, but no one did. They just smiled and shrugged their shoulder. Finally, Sam's mother said, "Maybe he's just a stray. Let's take him home with us. We can give him a good home, and Sam will love him." It's against the law to take a pet across the border, but Sam's parents hid the animal in a box, and no one saw it. When they got home, they showed it to Sam. "He's a pretty small dog," said Sam. "He's a Mexican dog," his father said. "I am not sure what kind. I think it's called a Mexican hairless." "We'll find out, but he's nice, isn't he?" They gave the new pet some dog's food. Then they washed it and brushed it and combed its fur. That night, it slept on Sam's bed. When Sam awakened the next morning, his pet was still there. "Mother," he called, "the dog has a cold." The animal's eyes were running, and there was something white around its mouth. Later that morning, Sam's mother took it to a vet. "Where did you get him?" the vet asked. "In Mexico," she said. "We think he's a Mexican hairless. I was going to ask you about that." "He's not hairless," the vet said. "He's not even a dog. He's a sewer rat, and he has rabies." Maybe you will remember. Mrs. Gibbs and her 16-year-old daughter, Rosemary, arrived in Paris on a hot morning in July. They had been on a vacation and now were returning home. But Mrs. Gibbs did not feel well, so they decided to rest in Paris for a few days before going on. The city was crowded with tourists. Still, they found a place to stay at a good hotel. They had a lovely room overlooking a park. It had yellow walls, a blue carpet, and white furniture. As soon as they unpacked, Mrs. Gibbs went to bed. She looked so pale that Rosemary asked to have the hotel's doctor examine her. Rosemary did not speak French, but fortunately, the doctor spoke English. He took one look at Mrs. Gibbs and said, "Your mother is too sick to travel. Tomorrow I will move her to a hospital, but she needs a certain medicine. If you go to my home for it, it will save time." The doctor said he did not have a telephone right now. Instead, he would give Rosemary a note for his wife. The hotel manager put Rosemary in a taxi and in French told the driver how to find the doctor's house. "It will take only a little while," he told her, "and the taxi will bring you back." But as the driver slowly drove up one street and down another, it seems to take forever. At one point, Rosemary was sure they had gone down the same street twice. It took almost as long for the doctor's wife to answer the door, then get the medicine ready. As Rosemary sat on a bench in an empty waiting room, she kept thinking, "Why can't you hurry? Please hurry." Then she heard a telephone ring somewhere in the house. But the doctor had told her he didn't have a telephone right now. What was going on? They drove back as slowly as they had come, crawling up one street and down another. Rosemary sat in the back seat filled with dread, her mother's medicine clutched in her hand. Why was everything taking so long? She was sure the taxi driver was going in the wrong direction. "Are you going to the right hotel?" she asked. He didn't answer. She asked again, but still he didn't reply. When he stopped for a traffic light, she threw open the door and ran from the cab. She stopped a woman on the street. The woman did not speak English, but she knew someone who did. Rosemary was right. They had been driving in the wrong direction. When she finally got back to the hotel, it was early evening. She went up to the desk clerk, who had given them their room. "I'm Rosemary Gibbs," she said. "My mother and I are in room 505. May I please have the key?" The clerk looked at her closely. "You must be mistaken," he said. "There's another guest in that room. Are you sure you are in the right hotel?" He turned to help someone else. She waited until he was finished. "You gave us the room yourself when we arrived this morning," she said. "How could you forget?" He stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "You must be mistaken," he said. "I have never seen you before. Are you sure you are in the right hotel?" She asked to see the registration card they had filled out when they arrived. "It's June and Rosemary Gibbs," she said. The clerk looked in the file. "We have no card for you," he said. "You must be in the wrong hotel." "The hotel doctor will know me," Rosemary replied. "He examined my mother when we arrived. He sent for me for medicine she needed. I need to see him." The doctor came downstairs. "Here's the medicine for my mother," Rosemary said, holding it out to him. "Your wife gave it to me." "I have never seen you before," he said. "You must be in the wrong hotel." She asked for a hotel manager who had put her in the taxi. Surely he would remember her. "You must be in the wrong hotel," he said. "Let me give you a room where you can rest. Then maybe you will remember where you and your mother are staying." "I want to see our room," Rosemary said, raising her voice. "It's room 505. But it was nothing like the room she remembered. It had a double bed, not twin bed. The furniture was black, not white. The carpet was green, not blue. There was someone else's clothing in the closet. The room she knew had vanished, and so had her mother. "This is not the room," she said. "Where is my mother? What have you done with her?" "You are in the wrong hotel," the manager said patiently, as he were speaking to a young child. Rosemary asked to see the police. "My mother, our things, the room, they have all disappeared," she told them. "Are you sure you are in the right hotel?" they asked. She went to her embassy for help. "Are you sure it is the right hotel?" they asked. Rosemary thought that she was losing her mind. "Why don't you rest here for a while?" they said. "Then maybe you'll remember." But Rosemary's problem was not her memory. It was what she didn't know. How was the story end? What happened to Rosemary's mother? When the hotel doctor saw Mrs. Gibbs, he knew at once that she was about to die. She had a form of the plague, a dread disease that killed quickly and caused frightening epidemics. If the word got out that a woman had died of the plague in the heart of Paris, there would be panic. People in the hotel and elsewhere would rush to escape. The doctor knew what the hotel's owner expected. He was to keep this case a secret, otherwise they would lose lots of money. To get Rosemary out of the way, the doctor sent her to the other side of Paris for some worthless medicine. As he expected, Mrs. Gibbs died soon after she left. Her body was smuggled out of the hotel to a cemetery, where it was buried. A team of workmen quickly repainted the room and replaced everything in it. The desk clerk were ordered to tell Rosemary that she was in the wrong hotel. When she insisted on saying her room, it had become a different place, and, of course, her mother had vanished. All those involved were warned that they would lose their jobs if they gave away the secret. The void panic in the city, the police and the newspaper agreed to say nothing of the death. No police reports were filed. No news story appeared. It was as if Rosemary's mother and her room had never existed. In another version of the story, Rosemary and her mother had separate rooms. Mrs. Gibbs died during the night while Rosemary was asleep. Her body was removed. Then her room was repainted and refurnished. When Rosemary could not find her mother the next morning, she was told that her mother was not with her when she checked in. After many months of searching, a friend, a relative, or the young man herself finds someone who worked in the hotel and, for a bribe, reveals what happened. Clickety-cling. An old lady got sick and died. She had no family and no close friends. So the neighbor got a grave digger to dig a grave for her. And they had a coffin made, and they placed it in her living room. As for the tradition, they washed her body and dressed her up in her best clothes and put her in the coffin. When she died, her eyes were wide open, staring at everything and seeing nothing. The neighbor found 2 old silver dollars on her dresser, and they put them on her eyelids to keep them closed. They lit candle and sat up with her so that she would not be too lonely on the first night that she was dead. The next morning, a preacher came and said a prayer for her. Then everybody went home. Later, the gravedigger arrived to take her to the cemetery and bury her. He stared at the silver dollar on her eyes, and he picked them up. How shiny and smooth they were. How thick and heavy. They're beautiful, he thought, just beautiful. He looked at that dead woman with her eyes wide open. He felt she was staring at him, watching him hold her coin. It gave him a creepy feeling. He put the coin back on those eyes of hers to keep them closed. But before he knew it, his hand reached out again and grabbed the coin and stuck them in his pocket. Then he grabbed a hammer and quickly nailed shut the lid on the coffin. "Now you can't see anything," he said to her. Then he took her out to the cemetery, and he buried her as fast as he could. When the gravedigger got home, he put the 2 silver dollars in a tin box and shook it. The coin made a cheerful rattling sound, but the gravedigger wasn't feeling cheerful. He couldn't forget those eyes looking at him. When it got dark, a storm came up, and the wind started blowing. It blew all around the house. It came in through the cracks and around the window and down the chimney. Whoosh. The fire flared and flickered. The gravedigger threw some fresh wood on the fire, got into bed, and pulled the blankets up to his chin. The wind kept blowing. Whoosh. It went. The fire flared and flickered and cast evil-looking shadow on the walls. The gravedigger lay there thinking about the dead woman's eyes staring at him. The wind blew stronger and louder, and the fire flared and flickered and popped and snapped, and he got more and more scared. Suddenly he heard another sound. Click-click-cling, click-click-cling. It was the silver dollar rattling in the tin box. "Hey!" the gravedigger shouted. "Who's taking my money?" But all he heard was the wind blowing on the flame flaring and flickering, and the snapping, popping, and the coin going clickety-cling, clickety-cling. He leaped out of bed and chained up the door. Then he hurried back, but his head had barely touched the pillow when he heard clickety-cling, clickety-cling. Then he heard something way off the distance. It was a voice crying, "Where is my money? Who's got my money? Who?" And the wind blew, and the fire flared and flickered and snapped and popped, and the money went clitter-cling, clitter-cling. The grave digger was really scared. He got off the bed again and piled up the furniture against the door, and he put a heavy iron skillet over the tin box. Then he jumped back into bed and covered his head with a blanket. But the money rattled louder than ever, and way off a voice cried, "Give me my money! Who's got my money?" And the wind blew, and the fire flared and flickered and snapped and popped, and the grave digger shivered and shook and cried, "Oh Lord, oh Lord." Suddenly the front door flew open, and it walked the ghost of the dead woman with her eyes wide open, staring at everything and seeing nothing. Ring on her finger. Daisy Clark had been in a coma for more than a month when the doctor said that she had finally died. She was buried on a cool summer day in a small cemetery about a mile from her home. "May she always rest in such peace," her husband said. But she didn't. Late that night, a grave robber with a shovel and a lantern began to dig her up. Since the ground was still soft, he quickly reached the coffin and got it open. His hunch was right. Daisy had been buried wearing two valuable rings, a wedding ring with a diamond in it, and a ring with a ruby that glowed as if it were alive. The thief got down on his knees and reached into the coffin to get the rings, but they were stuck fast on her finger, so he decided that the only way to get them was to cut off her finger with a knife. But when he cut into the finger with the wedding ring, it began to bleed, and Daisy Clark began to stir. Suddenly, she sat up. Terrified, the thief scrambled to his feet. He accidentally kicked over the lantern, and the light went out. He could hear Daisy climb out of her grave as she moved past him in the dark. He stood there frozen with fear, clutching the knife in his hand. When Daisy saw him, she pulled her shroud around her and asked, "Who are you?" When the grave robber heard this, "Corpse, speak!" he ran. Daisy shrugged her shoulders and walked on, and never once looked back. But in his fear and confusion, the thief fled in the wrong direction. He pitched headlong into her grave, fell on the knife, and stabbed himself. While Daisy walked home, the thief bled to death. The window. Margaret and her brothers, Paul and David, share a small house on top of the hill just outside the village. It was so warm one summer's night that Margaret could not sleep. She sat up in bed in the darkness of her room, watching the moon move across the sky. Suddenly, something caught her eye. She saw two small yellow-green lights moving through the woods near the graveyard at the bottom of the hill. They looked like the eyes of some animal, but she could not make out what kind of creature it was. Soon the creature left the woods and moved up the hill towards the house. For a few minutes, Margaret lost sight of it. Then she saw it coming across the lawn toward her window. It looked something like a man, and yet it didn't. Margaret was terrified. She wanted to run from her room, but the door was next to her window. She was afraid the creature would see her and break in before she could escape. When the creature turned and moved in another direction, Margaret rushed to the door, but before she could open the door, it was back. Margaret found herself staring through the window at a shrunken face like that of a mummy. Its yellow-green eyes gleamed like a cat's eyes. She wanted to scream, but she was so frightened that she could not make a sound. The creature broke the window glass, unlocked the window, and crawled inside. Margaret tried to flee, but the creature caught her. It twisted its long, bony finger into her hair, pulled back her head, and sank its teeth into her throat. Margaret screamed and fainted. When her brothers heard her piercing scream, they rushed to her room, but by the time they got the door unlocked, the creature had fled. Margaret lay on the floor bleeding and unconscious. While Paul tried to stop the bleeding, David chased the creature down the hill towards the graveyard, but soon he lost sight of it. The police thought it was the work of an escaped lunatic who believed he was a vampire. When Margaret recovered, her brother wanted to move to a safer place where it would be harder to break in, but Margaret refused. The creature will never come back. She was sure of that. But just in case, Paul and David began to keep loaded pistols in their rooms. One night months later, Margaret was awoken by a scratching sound at the window. When she opened her eyes, there was the same shrunken face staring at her. That night, her brother heard her cries in time. They chased the creature down the hill, and David shot in the leg. But the creature managed to scramble over the graveyard wall and disappear near an old burial vault. The next day, Margaret and her brother watched as the sexton of the church opened the burial vault. Inside was horrifying skin. Broken coffin, bones, and rotting flesh were scattered all over the floor. Only one coffin had not been disturbed. When the sexton opened it, there lay the creature with the shrunken face that had attacked Margaret. The telltale bullet was in its leg. They did the only thing they knew of to rid themselves of a vampire. The sexton built a roaring blaze outside the vault and fed the shrunken body the flame. They watched the body burn until nothing remained but ashes. Wonderful sausage. One dark, rainy Saturday afternoon, a fat and jolly butcher named Samuel Blunt had an argument over money with his wife, Eloise. Blunt lost his temper and killed Eloise. Then he ground her up into sausage meat and buried her bone under a big flat rock in the backyard. To keep the murder a secret, he told everyone that she had moved away. Blunt mixed his new sausage meat with pork, then seasoned it with salt and pepper, added some sage and thyme and a bit of garlic. To give a special flavor, he smoked in it his smokehouse for a while. He called it Blunt's special sausage. There was such a demand for his new sausage that Blunt bought the best hogs he could find and started raising his own pork. He also kept a sharp lookout for humans who might make a tasty sausage meat. One day, a nice, plump school teacher came into his shop. Blunt grabbed her and ground her up. Another time, Blunt's dentist came by. He was a little round man, and into the grinder he went. Then one by one, the children in the neighborhood began to disappear, and so did their kitten and puppies. But no one ever dreamed that Blunt the butcher had anything to do with it. Things went on that way for years. Then one day, Blunt made a big mistake. A fat boy came into the butcher shop. Blunt grabbed him and started to drag him off the sausage grinder. But the boy broke loose and ran out of the shop. And Blunt chased after him, waving a big butcher knife. When people saw this, they realized at once what had become of all the missing children and grown-up and the kittens and the puppies. An angry crowd had gathered at the butcher shop. No one knows for sure just what happened to Blunt that day. Some say he was fed to his hogs. Others say he was fled to his sausage grinder. But he was never seen again, and neither was his wonderful sausage meat. The cat's paw. Somebody was stealing the meat Jed Simpth kept in his smokehouse. Every day a ham or smoked bacon or something else was missing. Finally, Jed decided he had to put a stop to it. One night he hid in the smoking house with his rifle and waited for the thief. He didn't have to wait long, for soon a black she-cat slunk in. She was the biggest cat Jed had ever seen. When she jumped up and pulled down a ham hanging from the ceiling, Jed grabbed his rifle and turned on the light. But instead of running away, the cat jumped at him. He fired and shot off one of her paws. Jed was sure he heard the woman scream right after his gun went off. The cat began tearing around the room, spitting and yowling. Then she ran up the chimney and was gone. Jen stared at the cat's paw, only it wasn't a cat paws anymore. A woman's foot lay wriggling on the floor, all shook up and bloody. So it which that's been doing it, he told himself. Just then one of Jed's neighbor, a fellow named Burdick, came racing down the road to get a doctor. His wife's foot had been shot in an accident, he told Jed. She was bleeding pretty bad, he said. The doctor got to her barely in time. People who were there when it happened said that she was spitting and yowling just like a cat. The cat in a shopping bag. Mrs. Briggs was driving to the shopping mall to do some last-minute Christmas shopping when she accidentally ran over a cat. She could not bear to leave the corpse on the road for other cars to hit and squashed. So she stopped, wrapped the cat in some tissue paper she had with her, and put it in an old shopping bag in the back seat. She would bury it in the backyard when she got home. At the mall, she parked her car and began walking to one of the stores. She had taken only a few steps when out of the corner of her eye, she saw a woman reach into the open window of her car and take the shopping bag with a dead cat. Then the woman quickly got into a car nearby and drove away. Mrs. Briggs ran back to her car and followed the woman. She caught up with her at a diner downtown. She followed her inside and watched the woman slide into a booth and give a waitress her order. As the woman sat sipping her soda, she reached into Mrs. Briggs' shopping bag. Then she bent down and looked inside. A look of horror crossed her face. She screamed and fainted. The waitress called an ambulance. 2 attendants carried the woman away on a stretcher, but they left the shopping bag behind. Mrs. Briggs picked up the bag and ran after them. "This is hers," she called. "It's her Christmas present. She wouldn't want to lose it." The dead man's hand. The students at school for nurse got along quite well with one another, except for Alice. The trouble with Alice was that she was perfect. At least that is how it seemed to other students. She was always friendly and always cheerful. Nothing ever upset her. Her school assignments were always on time and always perfect. She didn't even bite her fingernails. Many of the student nurses resented Alice. They would have liked to see her fail at something, become frightened, or cry, or do something that showed that she had weakness like they did. One night, several students tried to frighten Alice with a practical joke. They borrowed the hand of a corpse that had been studying in anatomy and tied it to a light cord in her closet. When she tried to turn on the light, she would find herself holding a dead man's hand. "That would scare anybody," one of them said. "If it doesn't scare her, nothing will." After tying the hand in place, they went to the movies. When they got back, Alice was asleep, but when they didn't see her the next morning, they decided to find out what had happened. There was no sign of Alice in her room, but they soon found her. She was sitting on the floor in her closet, staring at the dead man's hand and mumbling to herself. Alice didn't even look up. The joke had worked, but nobody was laughing.